Figurative language. What is it and why do we use it? The focus standards for this lesson will be RL4, determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in the text, including figurative and connotative meanings. Analyze the cumulative impact of specific word choices on meaning and tone. Also, L5, demonstrate understanding of figurative language, word relationships, and nuances in word meanings. Some of the lingo in RL4, such as figurative and connotative meanings, I just wanted to explain some of that real quick. So, a figurative meaning is departing from its literal meaning. So, it's more of a symbolic description. A word's connotation is its implied meaning. And this is kind of the social definitions that we associate with words. A denotation of the word is the dictionary definition. Okay, so you may have words that have the same dictionary definition, but their connotations can be positive or negative, and we'll talk about that again in a second. Cumulative impact of the overall text. Cumulative means the whole thing. And so we're going to be talking about how some of these types of figurative language have an effect on the story, the text as a whole. Tone is how the author feels about the topic of the text. So you can really grasp how they feel about something based off what they're saying. L5, the only thing I thought you guys may not know in that standard was nuances, which is just slight differences in word meanings. Here we're going to talk about the connotations again. So, skinny. So you have slender and bony. Even though slender and bony basically mean skinny, slender is more of a compliment or a positive connotation. Bony is more of a negative connotation. You wouldn't want to tell somebody they look bony or they would be offended. Okay, let's dive in. Figures of speech. Why might an author use a figure of speech instead of writing, literally, word for word, what he or she means? Figures of speech are better for creating a visual image or an emotional response for the reader. They can also clarify the exact message the author is trying to communicate. One example we're going to look at is idioms. Idioms are expressions that mean something other than the literal definition of the words. So these are commonly used expressions that you've probably seen before, and idioms give a piece of writing a very informal tone. And a few examples are a piece of cake, which means something is easy to do, crack someone up, which is make them laugh, food for thought is, something to think about, hit the books means study, and under the weather means feeling sick. Like I said, these give writing a very informal tone. Euphemisms are polite, indirect expressions that replace words or phrases that are considered harsh or offensive. Okay, so let's read this paragraph together. My older sister tied the knot to her high school sweetheart a year ago, and guess what? She just told me that she has a bun in the oven. I'm going to be an aunt. My sister told me that she is going to name me godmother in her will in the event she and her husband take a dirt nap while the offspring is still underage. I'm so excited that I can hardly contain myself. My sister isn't as enthused because she is worried about getting husky, but she has always been as thin as a rail. Find the euphemisms and explain the effect they make on the text. So a few of the euphemisms in that paragraph were tied the knot, which means to get married, sweetheart, which means boyfriend or husband, bun in the oven, which means pregnant, take a dirt nap, which means they die, contain myself, which means she's just really excited, husky means fat, and as thin as a rail means skinny. These euphemisms give the paragraph a light-hearted tone. Our next example of figurative language is similes, which are comparisons that help convey details. In the quote, it says, I would have given anything for the power to soothe her frail soul, tormenting itself in its invincible ignorance like a small bird beating about the cruel wires of a cage. In this quote, the author is explaining how the soul is beating itself up, uselessly, like a bird trying to free itself from a cage. The author used the simile to give the reader a visual of what he is describing, when the literal words will not do the situation justice. So, if he were to have just said, she's beating herself up and it's really sad, you wouldn't grasp the intensity of the moment or the intensity of the situation if he had just said it word for word, literally. But by using the simile, he paints a more in-depth picture of what he is experiencing. Metaphors are just like similes, but without using like or as. So, for example, I'm drowning in a sea of grief. If you had just said, I'm grieving, people won't grasp the intensity of your grief. So if you say, I'm drowning in a sea of grief, it shows how overwhelming it is. She was fishing for compliments. She's not literally casting a lure. She's just really working hard for those compliments, okay? I'm feeling blue. Until we become like the little girl in Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, none of us are likely to turn as blue as a blueberry. This is a metaphor meaning someone is sad. Just like similes, authors use metaphors to explain details better than they could with the literal phrases. Analogies. An analogy is similar to a simile or metaphor, but more extensive. Using an analogy can be a way of explaining something unknown through a comparison of something familiar. So using previous knowledge to explain something new. Interpreting analogies requires the reader to think by visualizing the image the author is painting. Often it is up to the reader to complete the analogy and thinking about how these two images are alike. Only by doing this analysis can the reader fully understand the author's intended message. So, for example, the structure of an atom is like a solar system. The nucleus is the sun, and electrons are the planets revolving around their sun. So, in this example, you have both a metaphor and a simile, but the analogy is the extended comparison. So, the whole thing creates an analogy. And it is using your previous knowledge of a solar system to explain to you the structure of an atom. Okay, they crowded very close about him with their hands always on him in a careful, caressing grip, as though all the while feeling him to make sure he was there. It was like men handling a fish which is still alive and may jump back into the water. The people are taking a prisoner to the gallows to be hanged. They are holding him firmly as if he were a fish which might slip away and escape. So the analogy is using your previous knowledge of knowing what a fish may act like to get away from somebody, catching it, to understand why these people are holding him so tightly while taking him prisoner. Okay, personification is giving human characteristics to a non-living object. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too, for his civility. Okay, so this whole poem is full of examples of personification. In fact, death has been personified by the poet saying he kindly stopped for me. Again, in the second stanza, he knew no haste, and so on. Obviously, death is not a human, and so she gives him human characteristics through her poem to kind of make it, to help you understand what she's trying to show you better. Okay, hyperbole. Hyperboles are the use of exaggeration to emphasize something. The quote says, "Well now, one winter it was so cold that all the geese flew backward and all the fish moved south and even the snow turned blue. Late at night it got so frigid that all spoken words froze solid afore they could be heard. People had to wait until sunup to find out what folks were talking about the night before." Freezing of the spoken words at night in winter, and then warming them up in the warmth of the sun during the day are examples of hyperbole, which has been effectively used in this short excerpt from an American folktale. So obviously, it was not so cold that words froze in air. But they're using this hyperbole, this exaggeration, to portray to you how cold they felt during this very bad winter. Okay? An oxymoron combines opposite and contradictory words to make a point. Romeo says, "Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create, O heavy lightness, serious vanity, mishappen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep, that is not what it is. This love feel I, that feel no love in this. Dost thou not laugh?" We notice a series of oxymora being employed when Romeo confronts the love of an inaccessible woman. And he uses all these oxymorons or contradictory terms, which contradictory means opposite or, doesn't get along with each other. He uses these contradictory terms to explain or highlight his mental conflict within himself. And so you can really feel the struggle that he's having within himself by all of these oxymorons throughout this quote. Imagery. Imagery paints a picture with words. The quote says, "It was a rimy morning and very damp. I had seen the damp lying on the outside of my little window. Now I saw the damp lying on the bare hedges and spare grass. On every rail the gate wet lay clammy, and the marsh mist was so thick that the wooden finger on the post directing people to our village, a direction which they never accepted, for they never came here, was invisible to me until I was quite close under it." Okay, the repeated use of the words damp and wet make us feel how miserable it was for him that damp and cold morning. The thick marsh mist aids our imagination to visualize the scene of morning in a marshland, so you can really understand what he's seeing around him based on this quote, because he literally gives you the exact details of the morning. A paradox is a type of figurative language that contains ideas that seem to contradict or go against logic. So I use this quote from Hamlet that says, "I must be cruel to be kind," which doesn't make sense when you read it the first time, but how can an individual treat others kindly even when he is cruel? However, Hamlet is talking about his mother and how he intends to kill Claudius, his mother's husband, who killed Hamlet's father, to avenge his father's death. This act of Hamlet will be a tragedy for his mother and for Claudius, obviously, but Hamlet wants to do justice to his father. So he's going to be cruel to somebody else in order to be kind to his father. Okay, why? Why do we use figurative language? Using figurative language is an effective way of communicating an idea that is not easily understood because of its abstract nature or complexity. Writers use figurative language to evoke the emotions in their readers. It is an incredible literary element that